Hello and welcome to Beyond Top 10 Tennis. My name is Dr. Ashley Morgan Berge and I'm your host. I'm the author of 11 books, a CEO of 12 years, the founder of a startup set on data privacy, and most importantly, an elite performance coach of over 18 years, having worked with athletes throughout Europe, the United States to Australia. And of course, most excitingly, I am the world's leading scientist on coach and athlete performance, specifically behind how to develop a top 10 tennis ranking. My work includes everything from mitigating injuries to conditioning behaviors that set a player up long-term for the long game towards a top 10 tennis ranking. I'm behind theories from the optimal performance theory, optimal behavior for optimal performance, the barrier breaker, the rule of transference to the golden rule. As has become custom, each episode we dive into one of my books to share additional insights and dig a little bit deeper. We've been focusing on the secrets to optimal performance success, a comprehensive discussion on developing elite coaches and players, with well over now 40 episodes to date. Today's topic plays its own role, like so many other episodes, in developing the player, parent to coach for that road ahead towards a top 10 tennis ranking. So, as always, buckle in and enjoy the ride. Thank you so much for joining us today. Oh my goodness, how far we've come. Whether you are new or you've been with us for some time now, I always try to record the intro fresh, which means every time a new episode is released, the same goes for the intro, opposed to having that something that's on repeat. And I think every time I share that and read that, I get a little bit more excited because I do read or review how many episodes we've got to date, and I think I have a bit of a buzz that just courses through me, which hopefully goes to show how excited I am with each episode to be able to share these insights, because I'm sure if you are an avid tennis player, coach, fan, parent and or guardian, you know what's happening on a weekly or daily to monthly basis on the tennis landscape. If you are not in tennis, but you're obviously involved in sport in some way, shape or form across that spectrum, then you are well versed, I think, on the advantages that the science that underpins developing that top 10 tennis ranking has to share, and how cross-sectional that is, because we've spoken about that in a number of episodes, maybe not all of them, but how applicable it is, because we do touch on that humanized approach, and irrespective if we are talking about that, it's still applicable to other sports, irrespective what sport that is. Now, in some of our more recent episodes, I'm not going to say if and or when or which one, because I think we've touched on it in a number, but we have discussed the Olympic pathways and the correlation with developing a top 10 tennis ranking, which is attributed to developing the best in the world. And that's also something my most recent publication did touch on. So this the 7 keys to optimize your life indirectly, and the one to come again, hopefully in the next couple of months, I will try to have it out by the end of the year, but there's no promising, and that is we have touched on that time frames when we looked at pressure, and I did put my hand up so I could share those recounts with you. though back to that Olympic correlation, because Paris is next year, 2024, which is incredibly exciting. But we can use this work in the best possible way to achieve those podium finishes, which essentially is that gold, silver, bronze, because we look at the best in the world. Now, we obviously have the correlations for tennis specifically from the technical standpoint, but when we're looking at what's behind this work on developing the best in the world, we have direct correlations with the best in the world when we're reframing that to a conversation around the Olympics, which gets me very excited. It's indirectly going to be just delved into a little bit more in this publication I'm currently working on and writing towards, and that's why I think our most recent episodes have been a bit more in depth, not just, I think, specific to the secrets to optimal performance success, because this is a first for me as well, where I am sharing with you on a weekly basis, but also writing. Given that this podcast is new, it started this year, so obviously dates where I think we've built and established our foundation and where our roots lie, and the 11 books I've published to date prior were not in, let's say, tandem and or competition indirectly with a podcast. Now, I don't necessarily mean a competition, I think, in the generalized sense, but in the sense of time and commitment. So there's always going to be a crossover, which I think is incredibly rewarding for you, the listeners out there, because you're getting newer insights opposed to just one-dimensional in one way, shape or form. But going back to today's focus of today's episode, if you are familiar with our last 2 episodes, we've been recapping key parts of the secrets to optimal performance success. Given that it's been, I think, roughly 4 episodes ago now, we really wrapped up the book. We finished the final section of our final chapter, which has now afforded us the time to really dive in to share how these moving parts, I like to describe it as, intersect to build that athlete. And again, it's something I'm currently writing on and or about, and it just goes to show how, whether it's book 1 or book 11, and how they really contribute to building that whole athlete, because not one book does the job. It's over, whether that's 9 or 10 text currently, that outlay that, because it's so in depth. It's not something you're going to get in just one book. As much as you may want the answers in one, we're saying, if you're serious about that pathway, the long game, about developing that top 10 tennis ranking, there's a lot to consider. There's a lot involved, that even though obviously everything's backed by and underpinned by science and our just enormous data set, there's so much more. So it's really about taking your hand in some way, shape or form and guiding you about what that's all about. Because at the end of the day, I like to put myself in your shoes. Whether you are that player, I've been there. If you're that coach, I've obviously been there. And understanding really what's involved to get to the elite echelon of play. Now, today's episode, we're focusing on the next sections of that coach-athlete relationship. So the last 2 episodes have really been piggybacking off each other as we're really diving in deeper into chapter 1. So we're not really going to look at those Olympic correlations. That's just a key takeaway about what's to come, but to nudge you a little bit closer to review those previous episodes, because we've got 40 now plus behind us, but also the different texts that are there, whether it is this one directly or more recent ones, that you can start obviously anywhere, but I would encourage you, if you are new, to start from 1 through to 10 and to really understand, I think, the wider scope of what we're talking about, what's discussed, how to get there, because it has been designed to accommodate you from the beginning to the end. Now, I've spoken about this, I think, in a lot of detail, that irrespective if you are currently at club level, academy level, with no ranking whatsoever, or you are inside the top 20, they're just as applicable. And we say that from, I think, that maturity / learning framework, which I won't divulge too much now, but specifically we're talking about as you grow, as you obviously your education evolves, as you get older, and your depth of understanding, you are going to review something, let's say in the Secrets to Optimal Performance Success, incredibly differently, from a different angle, say if you are 25 years of age compared to 15 years of age. And also that depends on your skill level. So if you're in your first 10 years of play, a lot of things are going to be very fresh and new and complicated and complex, and you're going to have to really dive in deep and commit and potentially read the same segment over and over, 15, 20, 30 times until it's second knowledge to you. And for the 25, 27-year-old out there that's ascending towards the top 10, that's going to be a little different. It may only have to be, 2-3 times to really hit home, or it could be a really good refresh that just changes that thinking process behind your current applications in play to nudge you a bit closer. So the work has been designed in that way, irrespective if you're starting with this specific text or, text 5, 6, 7, 8 through to 10 or 11, which is the bit of fun one, indirectly. So these topics are so important in their own right, irrespective of what level you're at. So I can't stress it enough that, again, with your ranking, it does not matter where you're at. I do emphasize, or have in most of our episodes, around that developmental spectrum for the developing player, because even if you are, that 10-year-old through to that 16, 17-year-old, it is just as applicable when we're looking at specific facets of play for that, 23, 24-year-old to just recall, to just have that conversation with yourself to check in if that has been the case. But also when we're looking at that coach-athlete relationship, how pivotal that is in those developmental years, it is just as applicable as you're older. And so as you are that 21, 22-year-old to even that 30-year-old, 32-year-old, it's just as applicable, if not even more so. Because when you are at that age range, your level of understanding to rapport has obviously grown leaps and bounds. So it's so important to really fine-tune these other elements that are attributed to your performance. So So today's episode, we really wanted to just dig in deeper about player behavior. And yes, it's your responsibility as their coach. And so we do have an entire episode on this, which was roughly around episode 5. Now, I hope I'm sharing that right, because I'm not using it as a reference point. So all of these sections throughout the book have entire episodes on these topics. So this is where we obviously get the opportunity to be a bit more indirect and to pull from other sections to have a more generalized conversation about its applicability to your performance. So when we're looking at player behavior specifically, and we touched on this briefly in our previous episode, so this is to the coaches and or parents and or guardians out there. Now, we look at habitual behaviors, so ones that become ingrained in us. So if you are within that developmental spectrum, this is where you're the most impressionable. And we say that from that child development. So we look at behavioral implications that happens, which obviously pulls from behavioral learning, and we look at psychology as well. So the implications that happen through that developmental age range. Now, typically it's whether it's from birth upwards and it continues through to 14, 15, 16 years of age, where you are incredibly susceptible and vulnerable and impressionable. When it comes from, that performance standpoint in tennis, it's a wonderful time to learn and to upskill more heavily. As you move past this age range, you are more equipped with these tools to progress and then ascend along or through the rankings range. But this is not to say that when you're 17, 18, it's not the case, but we're saying when you are, that 17, 18, 19, you are coming into your own as that young adult, and you have the capacity to think independently, and or you are progressing to that stage. Whereas before that, your ability to think independently is not as independent. You are susceptible to other people's opinions and or what they're sharing. So, and that is why protecting that athlete, that child within this age range is so important, and that I have touched on, because there are substantial consequences, if not, which do unfortunately live with them for, in most cases, the rest of their life, or they do need help if it has been mismanaged. And I think you understand where I'm going, hopefully, with this conversation. But we're not going to deviate there. We're going to focus on the best case scenario if these things happen within this age range. Now, the rewards then for that player who was more impressionable and the right things were done within that age range, when they become or reach that young adult and they're in their early 20s, these different facets of play are ingrained in their game. Now, the reward here is with this work, if you start implementing the 7 keys throughout this age range, your game has the capacity to really be amplified throughout that second 10 years of play, because this is new. Remember that this has only come about. It started just over 10 years ago, the initial publication started 8 years ago, but we're still going with that data, and we're fine-tuning that. It was only roughly 3 years ago where we uncovered replicated success, which means what's behind a player winning more than one Grand Slam. So we crack the code, so to speak, so we know specifically what it takes. Why a lot of Grand Slam champions only win one. Why we have something over and over and over and over again, which is absolutely remarkable, but we understand why with the data behind us. But we're saying you don't have to miss out anymore if you do this, which means if you are building that athlete now, so if you are under, say, 18 years of age and you are able to learn the 7 keys and they're ingrained into your game, it means that your ascension towards, the top 50, then the top 30, the top 20, and eventually the top 10 is more streamlined, and you have the tools and you are equipped to do so, compared to 5 years ago, 10 years ago, prior, where this was not accessible. The science was still being worked out of if this was at all possible. And when we started this was not our endpoint. Our goal, our core objective, or my core objective, was to uncover a specific technical parameter. And fortunately, it's had all of these wonderful outcomes attributed to it. I'll leave that for the latest release to come. So when we're looking at obviously that behavioral standpoint, of course it's your responsibility as the coach, and there are indirect applications there, and obviously direct for that parent and or guardian, because it's what you do, and obviously you lead by example, but it's also what you accept, what you tolerate as acceptable and or allow. So it's about setting those boundaries as well. If you have a player that behaves poorly and you continue working with them and accepting that level of behavior, what are you going to do as the adult in the room to modify that? Because at the end of the day, if that athlete, that child, is under that 18 years of age, typically it's your responsibility to better shape them, to teach them, to engage them on more conducive behaviors, because, and we did touch on this in our previous episode, that you can guide them to ensure they stay within the code of conduct, for example, that governs sport. Every, I think, sporting body has their own rules and or consequences if they go outside those rules, or we can just generalize it by saying the code of conduct. And I did share some examples in our previous episode about some of the best players in the world that have their differences. But these behaviors are more often than not shaped very early on within that developmental age range. So what happens for these players when they are 21 plus, or it can be 18 plus, irrespective, these behaviors become normalized and pop out. And that is why you do see them in some of the best players in the world, because these behaviors have been normalized, and they have been normalized for that player to go hand in hand with their performance, and or it has been accepted and or viewed as acceptable within that, say, that triangular relationship, or within those of their inner circle. Now there are obviously eyebrows can be raised and it can be questionable, though we really want to be mindful of, from that coach's perspective, that we are developing that whole athlete, and we are encouraging them to be that, well-rounded, respectful human being with they have their wonderful manners, they look after others, they are very mindful of what their words have to say to their actions, all of those type of, I think, characteristics that we align with, I think, universally as that well-rounded child and or adult. Everyone, though, is going to have, I think, different views with that, due to varying cultural implications, which we did not touch on previously, because I think a lot of cultures are going to slightly differ, some more so than slight, about what they view as acceptable and or that they encourage. And I think it's very important to be mindful of that. And that is something, again, last episode I did not touch on, because even though we looked at the differences that can happen, it is really important to be mindful of varying cultural implications. and or different, I think, habitual character traits that are normalized because they are accepted. Now, this obviously differs between one culture to the next. Some are very similar, but others are going to actually be quite different. So we need to be, again, mindful of that tennis is a global sport. Sport in general is global. The Olympics is global. And again, we can refer now back to that humanized approach, because irrespective if it's in play or in life, it's so important to be mindful of these varying differences, but also their implications. And to be able to understand an individual better, it's important to just keep an open mind of what's acceptable for them, what is normalized for them, and okay. But to really refine this conversation or keep it specific to tennis, we want to keep it in the confines of the sport and that code of conduct, which is really what we're talking about. And unfortunately, there are potentially different behaviors that are established within that developmental age range from one culture to the next that may be okay with certain outbursts, or you could say throwing a racket, for example. Not that that's the case, but just as an example, if you are throwing your racket and nothing is done about it, for that 11-year-old, that 12-year-old, they're going to normalize that that's acceptable. They can behave that way. And then all of a sudden they progress on tour and they throw their racket and they can break a few, and obviously that's where the fines come in. And they are, because that's against the code of conduct. So the conversation really, when we're looking at player behavior, and it's a coach's responsibility, because a coach has that power, they have the capacity to redirect that energy, to redirect it into their performance, and to teach them how to redirect those emotions into play, opposed to those outbursts. And these are incredible behaviors that can be conditioned at an early age to help that player long term with their performance. So that's just one example of many that if they are handled that way. If you are a more mature player, so you're that young adult, you're that 18, 19, 20-year-old, and this has not been the case within that developmental age range, that's okay. You just need to work a little bit harder on adapting those behaviors, because again, within that child developmental spectrum, and so when we're looking at psychology to the learned or the behavioral implications, when we're looking at the scope of learning, I'm trying not to get too scientific or complex here, but we just know it's a lot easier, it's picked up a lot quicker because of, I think, that tangibility to susceptibility, and obviously more vulnerable ability, specifically when it comes to learning, that we're focused on here. But when you are older, you are not as susceptible and or vulnerable. You are more well-rounded. You have a better understanding of the world that you live in. So you are growing into a more independent thinker. So you really need to make that explicit, clear decision on how you're going to adapt those behaviors and commit towards that. So it's more of a decision that underpins that outcome, which is really delved into quite deeply in the 7 Keys to Optimize Your Life, which obviously uses tennis as that blueprint there, and that's an incredibly rewarding discussion. I'll bet I'm incredibly biased, but it has been designed in that respect. However, it's so important to run home that message about a player's behaviors and the power that a coach obviously holds. Now, the second topic today that we do have time to really delve into, just like I think the last 2 episodes when we've been recapping and discussing, we've managed to fit in 2 segments, which I think is is wonderful. So last episode, one of the topics we delved into was depression and anxiety, and I think the general sporting landscape and how this can happen and how to best manage. So this topic is mental stability, helping athletes cope with performance, and that is on page 51. But again, it'll be around episode 6 with its whole episode on this topic, because it's so important to have this conversation. Mental stability really, I think from that sporting perspective, can be viewed as mental conditioning, mental toughness, which I think is a really generalized term, just like mental health. But I think there are different connotations with the words in and of itself. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to that mental conditioning, mental toughness, there is not so much, I think, given and or normalized at that club academy level within that developmental age range, or not that I have actually seen firsthand in the last 10, 15 plus years. However, as that developing athlete back 20 years ago, that is something I did have access to. So somewhere along the way it got lost, it got displaced. But it's so important to have the conversation now to ensure it's integrated, because whether you want to agree or disagree, we know statistically that, and no, I do not have the statistics in front of me, but the amount of children within that developmental age range that do experience something with their mental stability is incredibly high. We know specifically in Australia, the rates of mental health and the demand for help in this space it's bursting at the seams. And we have COVID, for example, to not thank, but for those results. So we know that due to different, obviously, implications, connotations of what COVID brought about, that there have been a lot of internal conversations had that really have needed that guidance for a bit more help, and which is really good when the help is there and that child's able to put their hand up to ask for it. But we really need to be mindful of the parents, the guardians, the coaches out there, then that's not always going to be the case. But it's also so important to say that that mental health does not discriminate on age, and it does not need to be a negative conversation. It can be a very positive conversation that you are putting in that time to look after your mental health, because when we're looking at mental stability and obviously helping athletes cope with performance, again, the coaches, the parents, the guardians, and you need to ask yourself if you have the capacity to do that if your own mental health is not being looked after. So I think it's about reframing this conversation about you're looking after your physical health for the adults out there. So we're just going to deviate from the players for a little bit and go, if you are that adult in the room, you need to lead by example. And if you have a player that is reliant on your expertise and or just your care and your presence, can you show that, okay, you look after your physical health in some way, shape or form, whether it's walking, it's running. Those of you who have listened for some time, you know that I do enjoy a good run. And or you commit to looking after yourself and you're regular at the gym or different activities or groups or classes, irrespective, whatever works for you, are you taking the time to do the same for your mental health? More often than not, those type of activities for your physical health can help your mental health and obviously your emotional well-being. So we look at it as you go, your physical, emotional and mental. And obviously there are cross sections between all of them. They are all interlinked, but it's about taking the time. And so it's termed then, I think, or more popularized as self-care. So are you looking after yourself in, I think, those individualized categories, if you like? Now, it's so important then, again, for the adults in the room, so specifically the coaches, parents, guardians, who are leading by example, who are looked at as that guide to be able to have those conversations. Now, again, so look, talking to the players, the athletes out there, you could be, that 14-year-old or that 24-year-old. No age range is immune from wanting potentially some help with their mental health. Elite tennis players are not immune. We know, and there have been a number of elite tennis players inside the top 10, top 20, top 100 that have come out, put their hand up and said, hey, I have been experiencing depression and or anxiety and or whatever it may be for them. And that is completely normal. And it's so important to normalize these conversations because it's just something to do with mental health. It's almost akin to, and I look forward to the day that this happens, my physical health, I'm just not feeling the best because maybe you've got a bit of tennis elbow, but not feeling the best because I pushed myself too hard running and I've got something with my hip, which unfortunately is something that I've been dealing with this year, which I haven't really discussed. So that's another conversation. But imagine if it was viewed in the same way when you're just looking at your own mental stability, that you're putting in the work to look after your mental health. You're putting in the work, obviously, as that tennis player to look after your performance, so your tennis and your performative health. And I can say from a personal recount, am I putting in the work? I go, yeah, because I have been doing the rehabilitation for my hip, and it's putting in that work to make sure I am healthy and I can get back to that normalized level. And obviously normalize or normal is that baseline is different for everyone. That humanized approach, again, we're all individual. So drawing back that conversation to mental health, mental stability, mental well-being, irrespective how you would like to term it or what works best for you or what you feel most comfortable with, it's normal. And it's just about going, I'm going to take time today to work on my mental health. I'm going to take time today to work on my physical health. I have done my strength and conditioning for my performance. I'm going to take the time today to work on my emotional health. Maybe you're going to spend a few minutes, whether it's reading, more than a few minutes hopefully, journaling, whatever works best for you. But that also, I think, is attributed to your mental health and the time you're taking for that, whether it is going for a short run works best for you, meditating works best for you, whatever that may be. It's about just setting that time aside. So that is really, I think, important for the athletes, the players out there. And these habits, so those habitual traits, can become ingrained in us if it's led by example. So for the coaches, parents and or guardians out there, and it's a really important conversation to be had, because at the end of the day, no one's immune. So you may be an athlete, you may not be an athlete, whether it's current and or former, it does not matter, because each and every individual, so again with that humanized approach, needs to manage this. Maybe some do, obviously there is those that do it better than others, and there is some are going to run faster than others, and that's not what it's about. It's about being attentive and setting that time aside and drawing that discussion then back to self-care. And I think if we're able to reframe just mental stability in this way, it's incredibly important, because that's when we get to, I think, the discussion around performance and pressure. Because if everyone's looking after themselves, I think in the best possible way, they're setting that time aside, then we can have that conversation about that developing athlete who has their initial ranking. It's not just country specific, but they've got those initial ranking points on tour. So they could be 900 in the world. ascending towards 800 in the world. And then they're looking at ascending, next thing you know, it's 500 to 300 in the world. And they are on track. But when you're at that level of play, that comes with pressure and managing that performance, more often than not, it actually starts a lot earlier, before those ranking points are even of question in the junior ranks. But it's so important if you have already set the stage, so to speak, and you are implementing the tools to look after your mental health, so you know how to best manage your pressure with performance, then you are more equipped to, again, manage those outcomes, manage those emotions and or the consequences that come with, let's say, a non-desired result. So a poor performance, but you do not take it personally. You know that tennis specifically is a game, and you're going to get your wins and you're going to get your losses, and you're going to take those losses on the chin in a manner of speaking, but you're going to learn from them, opposed to tying that to your self-worth, tying that to your whole value as an athlete, and all the other, I think, negative connotations that can be stereotypically associated with that. So it's so important when we're able to establish a baseline of looking after your physical, emotional, and mental well-being, and employing those self-care techniques, whichever works for you best, and for the adults in the room to help you condition them. So irrespective if you are that young adult or that younger player, and you are on tour ascending towards the top 100, you have the tools to deal with that pressure. And pressure can come from yourself, can come from your coach, your family, irrespective, your fans even. You may take that in a different light, and the pressure could be too much. So it's about reframing what that pressure is to you and using that as an advantage, but also making sure you're taking the time to recalculate, reassess what that pressure is, where it's coming from, to review that process. Now, we've looked at reflective practice in the past. So it's essentially, when you're reviewing, it's a type of reflective practice, looking at yourself internally, intrinsically, what is helping you, what is serving you, what is not. And for the what is not, we want to remove that. We want to try to mitigate that or limit its ability to affect you or impact you, and setting up those boundaries to allow then that to become your new normal. So to re-habitualize and condition then those behaviors that are, I think, attributed to those outcomes. And that's a very, I think, complex way of saying it, which was not the intention. But it's about having that conversation with yourself or with your team about pressure, where that pressure is coming from, how you're feeling, how you can lessen that, how you can mitigate that, how you can use pressure as a good thing, as a motivating factor, as a positive opposed to a negative. And more often than not, it starts and can be viewed as something that's a negative, and we want to reframe that. And you are able to reframe that more readily if you have those tools about self-care, looking after your physical, so your performative health, then yes, your emotional and mental health, and being able to have those conversations. Now, even better, if you're, for the players and athletes out there, if your coach and or parent or guardian, they're all on the same page with that, and more importantly, obviously, is your coach, that's very healthy. It's a very conducive relationship, very conducive, good health athlete relationship, which really draws back to the emphasis of this chapter. And I think that's what we're going to finish on today, because at the end of the day, that's what we're after. We're after that exceptional relationship that is obviously has that mutual understanding, that looks after, obviously, yes, your own behavior, how is the coach's responsibility, but also mental stability, how it works in hand. So we want the coaches out there to look after please look after yourself as well. Have an understanding of, self-care mechanisms, routines, habits that work for you, and ensure that you're leading by example so you can set the stage in turn for your player and or athlete that you're working with. So these new conducive habits are able to be adopted into their game, so they're better equipped to deal with pressure with their performance, specifically when they're on the road to developing that top 10 tennis ranking. Thank you so much for joining us today. That was a lot, but I think we did get a little bit complex or complicated in some parts, because at the end of the day, not everything is streamlined and easy. We do dive into, I think, those more, complicated facets of play, but we really can streamline them with the right habits, with the right tools, and putting those correct building blocks in place. To grab a copy of The Secrets to Optimal Performance Success, head on over to AM8 International. That is am8international.com. For any comments or questions, head to AM8 or Topic Thread. That's the social platform set on data privacy. To interact with Beyond Top 10 Tennis, head on over to Twitter, Threads, LinkedIn or Instagram, and or to catch up on our weekly coaching tips, head on over to TikTok. And of course, to catch up on our blogs, head on directly to AM8 International and look for our blogs tabs, or go directly to Medium and interact with the community there on our blog posts. And of course, as always, I'll leave all the links in the episode notes. For something different, head on over to Pink Octopus Books. That's where my fictional release is. And to view this week's question and poll, be sure to visit Spotify if you are on one of the many other platforms Beyond Top 10 Tennis is now available on. For something left of field, visit Spruik for some random polls, and I would love your feedback there. And of course, if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, like, share, and all of the above would be absolutely phenomenal. And for those of you who are interested, we do have scholarships available at AMA International, as well as exclusive options to work with myself. There are limited windows available to nudge you closer towards that top 10 tennis ranking. So don't be shy, come and say hi. On that note, thank you so much. Whether you are new, thank you, or you've been with us from the beginning or some time now, thank you so much. I'm so grateful. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. Again, a little bit complicated, but I think it was streamlined on the other side as well, especially when we're looking at, the behavioral side, but also mental stability. I really hope you had some really strong takeaways there, and feedback, it's always welcome. So don't be shy. Please do come and say hi and leave that feedback. Have those conversations with us. And if you are on one of those social platforms, I really will personally try to get back to you. And I think that's the best bit about this. Look, on that note, thank you so much for listening. I am so incredibly grateful. I am your host, Dr. Ashley Morgan Berge, and this is Beyond Top 10 Tennis, and I'll see you next time.